It's not that I hate Stuttgart. It's a beautiful city. I just don't think that anyone should ever apply for a visa there. Hi, I'm Michaela. I'm a PhD student at the University of Tübingen. I am currently, thankfully, living in Tübingen, but we were living in Stuttgart before this, it's going to be a focal point of the majority of this conversation. I'm originally from New Zealand. I moved here for my studies with my husband, and I kind of just document my life. We do a lot of stuff from gymming and traveling and life as a student, but I also have a section where we just talk, we just chat, we get to know each other. I get to share my experiences with you so that you hopefully don't have to go through the same thing as me. But yeah, I basically moved to Germany to do my studies, and I wanted to document it because I don't remember much in life. I have the memory of a goldfish, so that's what I'm doing here. Thanks for clicking on this video, and I hope that if you're here because you're applying for a visa, that my experience can somehow help make the situation so much better. I want to start off by saying that I think the main issue with this whole process is that it doesn't need to be this complicated. There's a lot of issues with the lack of digitization in Germany and the fact that you can't book appointments online in a lot of cities. You kind of just have to turn up and wait in line for hours and hope that they see you. And when they have a call center, it's for 2 hours a day, and you often can't get through to the people that you need to get through to. So that's just a little disclaimer that it doesn't have to be this hard. The problem is we just have to work with the system, and sometimes the system is just broken. So I've split this conversation into 3 different sections, and I've got my computer here with everything written down because I needed to write it all down. This is a heck of a story, and I've been talking about doing this for the longest time. I think since I started my channel, I was like, oh, we'll talk about the visa process, thinking it would be easy. Whoops, foreshadowing there. And then when the process started and we realized how hard it was, and I started to have panic attacks most days and feeling like we were going to be deported, and that if we made one wrong step along the way that we'd never be able to come to Europe ever again, I decided to just leave this for the end. I might actually make a video with some of the footage that I filmed throughout it where I was just utterly distraught and talking about how life was really difficult and how this whole process was a lot worse than I thought it was going to be, but that is for another day. That is for reminiscing on past Michaela. Today, we are talking about how I can hopefully help you get a visa. The different sections that I'm going to be talking about is, firstly, what happened to us and why it was so difficult. Secondly, it's going to be what should have happened, and hopefully that section will help you with finding your visa and getting your visa however it works in your city, if it's Tübingen, if it's Stuttgart, if it's wherever else in Germany that you are. Hopefully that section will be the most useful. And then the last section is our specific case and what documents we needed. We've now applied for visas twice. The first one was just for a year, and I'll explain why it was just for a year. But the second one, it was here in Tübingen, and the system was so much better and the process was a lot smoother. And so I'll talk about the documents that we needed for our specific visas so that if you're doing the same thing, hopefully you can draw from that. I'm also going to start this by saying that if you can, you should 100% apply for your visa when you're in your home country. It's going to make the whole situation so much better, and you can guarantee that those people at least speak your language. A big crux of the story is that the Foreigners Office in Stuttgart, which is one of the most international cities in the whole of Germany, did not speak any other language than German. I can understand that to a degree because we're in Germany. I'm very fortunate that I have a B2 and so that I can speak German. I wouldn't say that my knowledge of visa-related issues was very good before this, but I just had to learn and I had to make do. But I met a lot of people throughout this process who didn't have any German because it wasn't required. They were being employed by an American company, for example. They were being sent to Germany to speak with American clients who were living here in Germany, and they had to go through this whole process themselves, not knowing a single word of German. Obviously, there are situations around that where you could probably hire an immigration lawyer. Your company theoretically should help you with that, but we were stuck in the situation where it was all on me. The other issue was that we couldn't find an apartment in Tübingen when we first moved to Germany, and so we were living in a city where we couldn't apply for the visa through my university. The university has a close relationship with the Ausländerbehörde, or the foreigners office here in Tübingen, and so they get a lot of students through, they get a lot of people through that are here for studies, and that made the whole situation a whole lot better when we moved to Tübingen. In Stuttgart, my university could do absolutely nothing. I was there on my own. They tried to contact on my behalf, they tried to help me out as much as they could, and there was just nothing that they could do. So that was another thing unique to our situation, that we were just living outside of the place where we could get any help. You have to apply for a visa wherever you're registered, and that just made this whole situation, unfortunately, a whole lot worse. So as a bit of context, we applied for 2 different visas. I applied for the visa for researchers because I'm here doing my PhD. And because we're married, my husband applied for the family reunion visa. There were other options. He could have, I think, applied for the job seekers visa, a study visa, and he would have enrolled in a language course, or a working visa. Because he's self-employed, though, the working visa was a little bit more difficult. There was a possibility that he could apply for the freelancers visa, but because his company is based in New Zealand, it made that a little bit harder as well. Thankfully, we were married, so he was able to apply for the family reunion visa. So those are the 2 visas that we applied for. There are so many different options, and I obviously can't speak to everything, but some of it is transferable in terms of the documents that you'll need, especially if you're a student moving to Germany. So, the main story, and I'm finally telling this and I can't believe it. I feel like I have talked about this so much to family and friends, and I just couldn't face talking about it online while it was happening. I felt like I wanted to document my life here in Germany, and this was just such a big stressor that I just couldn't really deal with it. So, basically, the biggest issue with our experience in Stuttgart was that you can't book an appointment online. I understand that's a thing in most other smaller towns. You kind of just have to turn up. I know in rural Tübingen, where it's part of the Tübingen area, but they've got their own foreigners office for the district that they just turn up. My friend had to do it. They just turned up. It worked out. He got seen in about 20 minutes because there's like nobody there. And it just worked out. In Stuttgart, which is a massive city, I think it's much bigger than Auckland. I don't actually know. I'll look it up and put the number here of how many people actually live in Stuttgart. But considering that there was no online booking system, this was just kind of atrocious. On top of that, we tried to call to book an appointment because that's what we were told when we registered. You've just got to call and call and call and hope that you get through. They had a 2-hour calling window each day where you could try and be one of the hundreds of thousands of people trying to call in. We also found out that they favor landline numbers over cell phones, but the place that we were living didn't have a landline. I tried calling from the university landline a few times, and that also didn't work, so I don't know what the deal with that is. But we just called and called and called and called, and we just couldn't get through. I think we called about 100 times on the first few days and didn't end up getting through, and my husband actually had the brilliant idea of calling a different department. We called up, kind of played dumb and being like, "Oh, I'm trying to get a visa. Can you please help me?" And they were like, "Oh, no, sorry, you've got the wrong department. I'll transfer you through." And thankfully, that worked for us. I don't know if it's going to work every time because obviously it's so dependent on whether they're actually going to pick up the transfer or not. But we were very fortunate to get through. Not that it helped in the grand scheme of things, but it's fine. But we ended up getting transferred through. I explained the situation and they're like, "Cool, we need these 10 documents if you can please email it to us." Within the day, literally within the working day, I got all of the documents organized and I sent them through to the email that I'd been given, and it bounced back. And I thought there must be something wrong. Maybe I took it down wrong. I Googled it and I found the email address on their website and it was correct. So I sent it through again and it bounced back again. And basically, I just kept getting these emails back. But basically, their inbox was so full with receiving emails that they could no longer receive any more emails until they deleted or until they cleared some. I don't know what kind of email system that they're using. I'm used to working for companies that they just buy massive cloud storage, whatever it is that they use. And I've never ever, in the recent past, let's say 10 years, had an experience where a company I've worked for has run out of inbox space. That is just either they haven't bought enough, or because of how atrocious their calling system is, they're receiving so many emails a day that it's just completely filling up the storage that they do have. Unfortunately, I was one of those people who I had to send my documents in, so I sent it, and I sent it, and I sent it, and I sent it, and eventually I got a confirmation saying that my email had gone through. So a few days later, I got a response saying that the documents that I'd sent in were wrong and I needed to fill out another 10 documents. Same deal. I filled out the documents in the same day. I collected everything together. I'm not going to say what the documents are because we went back and forth so many times and there were so many wrong documents that I don't want to confuse you and I don't want to give you the wrong things to be looking for. That's why I've got the section at the end talking about what documents we actually ended up needing to use. But basically, we got notification that we needed 10 other documents. Same day, filled it out, sent it in, and it bounced. Like, I'm not even joking. It bounced 20 times maybe. In the end of this, there's a whole section where I talk about turning up to the Auslanderbehörde because there was a whole issue with trying to leave the country. And I printed out all of the emails that I'd received, all of them saying that they'd bounced, all of the dates that I'd sent it and hadn't yet received a response for. And the wad was like this big. I don't know. Can you see that? It was like this big. It wouldn't even fit in a standard folder because of the amount of emails that I'd sent and the amount of auto responses I'd had saying the email couldn't be accepted because the inbox was full. So I sent and I sent and I sent and I sent and I sent, and it eventually got through. Thankfully. Again, I waited. A few days later, I got a response. The documents were wrong, and I had to fill out another 5. And I'm not even lying to you. This is unbelievable, but it's what happened. And I remember telling the story to people, and they're like, are you exaggerating? Like, is this really what happened? Yes. Yes, this is literally what happened to us. 2 times I filled out documents. They were the wrong documents. And the last time I was asked for 5 extra forms, filled them out, sent it in, same day, bounced. You know where the story is going? Eventually, I managed to get them sent in. I waited a few days, eventually got a response, and they said, perfect, we've got everything we need. We've now transferred you to the specific department that's working with you. So what happens is, I guess you send in all of your information to the general department is what it seemed like. And then once they get your documents and they get your application and what visa you're applying for, they send you to a specific department, whether it be the workers department, whether it be the students department, whether it be the family reunion department, I'm not sure. Because it was the family reunion and the PhD visa at the same time, my husband's visa kind of came under mine, and therefore we supposedly went through the students' visa department. That didn't actually end up happening, but that is what was supposed to be happening. So they transferred us to the department. They sent us the email saying that they'd received our documents and that we just needed to wait. A few days later, I received an email saying, hey, sorry, we've lost your documents. Can you please send them again? In my mind, how do you lose documents when they're digital? Surely you just find the email again. I don't know what happened, but I very happily sent in my documents again, received a response after them bouncing a few times that it had been received and they'd be processing it soon. A few days later, I got an email. It was a very strange email, but basically the email was like a weird auto reply. You know how on Outlook at least you can mark an email as it sends you an email when they've opened it, so you know that they've actually opened it. It seemed to be a similar thing where they had deleted my email essentially, and I was getting an email saying this email has been deleted from the system successfully. And it was the email with all of my documents attached, and I was like, that doesn't seem right. Maybe they've printed them out, maybe they've moved it elsewhere, and because they've copied it, they don't need it here anymore. I didn't know what was happening. I left it. And a few days later, they messaged me saying they'd lost my documents again. They did not lose my documents. They deleted my documents. But was there any way that I was going to be telling them this? No, because I wanted my visa, and I didn't want to be that person who was like screaming down the phone or turning up and being frustrated. One thing I actually ended up doing, which is tragically hilarious, is I went and looked up the Google reviews for the Ausländerbehörde. It's sad. It's literally, I think it's got 1 star, and it's a whole bunch of people ranting about how broken the system is and how awful people are there. And while I understand it based on how frustrated I was and we were at the point where our 90-day Schengen visa, or like visa-free period, had run out. We didn't have a replacement visa. We didn't have anything, basically. And so I didn't want to be deported because I made a scene. I don't know if that can happen or not, but I was just really worried. I didn't want to rock the boat. I didn't want to do anything wrong, so I just didn't complain the whole process. Anyway, I got this email saying that they'd lost my documents again. I sent it in. I got a confirmation to say that it had been received and that I'd hear from them shortly. A big crux to the story as well is that the specific visa that I applied for, the visa for researchers, should only take 4 weeks to process. It's a very specific visa where they're trying to get people into higher education in Germany. And so it's a bit of an easier process in the sense of you don't need to have a language requirement in general, depending on the course. And there's a little bit more leeway with some of the requirements. So I went into this thinking the process should only take a month. I started this, I think I sent my first email and call in January. And by this point, it was now April. I was starting to worry because I had signed up for a conference in London in May, and I'd actually received funding to go to the conference. They were going to be covering my flights and my part of my accommodation. And currently, I didn't have a visa to leave the country. The issue as well is that because we'd entered on the 90-day holiday, or like the Schengen visa period, we'd essentially legally overstayed our welcome. Even though we had a visa application in the process, if we left the country, there was the potential that we were going to be fined 200 euros. We weren't going to be allowed back in the country for, I think, 180 days. And then there was also the possibility that if we left the country, that we wouldn't be able to get back in, and that they'd cancel our visa application because we left the country. So there was a whole bunch of things going on. And I think they said they'd get back to me within a few weeks. And by this point, it was about 4 weeks later after them telling me that they'd received my documents and they were processing them. And I still hadn't heard anything. So I emailed and I called and I emailed and I called, and I went to my university. We have a secretary in our department, and she was so lovely and so kind and so helpful. And she called and she contacted her friend who works in immigration, and she contacted the Bürgermeister, who's I think like the mayor of the city. And there was like a whole bunch of stuff. She messaged so many people and couldn't get through to anybody. We had a whole bunch of people in the university helping, but like I said at the beginning, because I was living in a different city, there really wasn't anything that anyone could do. So even with the fact that they could speak obviously fluent German and they did as much as they could with all of their contacts, unfortunately nothing helped. So I got to the point where it was, I think, a week before we were supposed to be leaving on this trip to London, and I hadn't booked anything. I was too worried to book things because a lot of the time you can't get refunds for generic cancellation. And so I was too worried to buy flights, but then it was getting to the point where if we did get the visa, the flights were going to be a couple €100 each. And so we were just trying to figure out what was going to happen. And we thought that the best option is to turn up, explain the situation, and see what they can do. We also spoke to somebody that mentioned that you can contact border security and see what they say. Because when it comes down to it, essentially it's up to border security if they let you exit or enter the country. We managed to contact border security about how It was a research trip and I had funding to go. I was going on behalf of my university. There was actually a whole section of the conference that was talking about women in research and helping provide opportunities for women in research, especially in medieval history where it's not the dominant narrative. It's a very old white male perspective a lot of the time. And so there was going to be this whole program for that, and I'd been selected to be a part of that, and it was going to be epic. I've actually filmed some of the conference, I think, so I can link that up the top. So we called Border Security to see what they could do, and they said that there was an exemption that we could apply for, but we had to go to our local foreigners office. So I printed everything out, like I said, the wad of documents about this big, turned up to the foreigners office, stood in line. I think I got there at about 6 or 7 a.m. and waited in line. Basically, they have office hours where you can talk to people, and it was either going to be from like 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. or 2 to 5 p.m. and it changed each day, but it was a very short window. I went on a day where it opened at 9 a.m. and I got there about 6 or 7 and just stood there doing my readings. But I'd read online that some people had got there at like 4 a.m. and the line was already really long. I was panicking. Thankfully, it wasn't too long when I got there and we didn't have to wait too long. We ended up just, waiting in line. I did my readings and then they separated everyone into whether you had an appointment or not and why you were here. So there were different reasons that people were here, whether it was to pick something up or whether it was to, send in a query or whether it was to get information. There were a bunch of different lines. And I basically said that I'd sent my documents in. I hadn't heard back. It had been weeks and I needed to get an exemption because Border Security told me that I could get an exemption. So he lets me in and I talk to somebody and the guy's like, this doesn't exist. And I was like, well, what do you mean it doesn't exist? Because I spoke to Border Security and they said I could apply for an exemption because I was waiting to hear back about my application and because it was essentially for work. And he's like, nope, exemptions don't exist. I don't know what Border Security was telling you. I later found out that exemptions do exist. He just didn't know what he was talking about. And I think it was in that moment that it sunk in how stressed I was about this whole process. By this point, it was end of May. And I'd applied for this or started applying for this in January. This should have taken a month max from application to receiving my visa. And it was just hideous. I was so stressed out, so panicked. I was barely sleeping at night. And it was just, honestly, it was the worst experience about moving to Germany so far. And I don't want to say this to complain about Germany because I have absolutely loved this country and it has been exactly where I needed to be, and the people that I'm surrounded with are the best people that I could be surrounded with for my PhD. I could just go on and on and on, but I don't need to. This isn't the place for that. But the visa situation has been the biggest stressor about this entire move. So eventually we heard back from the immigration office and they told us we'd thankfully been given an interview. It was ironically for the day that we were going to be arriving back from London had we have gone, which was so frustrating that they literally could have given us an interview at any time over the last month and a half, and it just happened to be the day we were going to be arriving back from this research trip. But it's fine. I got over it. I managed to present online at least. And they said in the email that we needed to bring a translator for Luke because he was here on a family reunion visa. As a part of that, he has a language requirement waiver. So he doesn't need to know German to be here because I'm the reason that he's coming to the country. And because of that, he needed a translator because theoretically we were going to be separated and he needed to be interviewed on his own to show that he wasn't here against his will, but that he'd chosen to come. And I spoke to my supervisor about it and he's like, look, I'm a professor. Hopefully I can push my weight around a little bit. So I'll be the one that comes up and acts as translator, which I'm like, this guy's a bigwig. Like he's really well known in our field, arguably one of the top people in Europe for our field. And he just had to take an afternoon off so he could come up to Stuttgart. So he basically took a train up to Stuttgart, which if you've heard me complaining about the trains between Tübingen and Stuttgart, when it should be 45 minutes and it's never 45 minutes, it is always at least an hour, if not an hour and a half. He took the train up, it was delayed. He's a trooper. He came with us to our interview. We waited and we were eventually called for our interview. We walked into the room and she was like, cool, so we just need you to scan your fingerprints and sign here and then you're all done. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? She's like, oh no, you just need to scan your fingerprints and sign this piece of paper and you're all done. Are you serious? I cancelled my research trip and got this incredibly well-respected medievalist, historian, professor, and like head of the department to take a train up to here for no reason. Oh my gosh, I was mad. I was mad, but it gets better. We signed our document, we gave them our fingerprints, we paid, and she's like, cool, so the visa's going to take about 4 weeks to get to you. Are you doing any traveling in the next 4 weeks that you'll need an exemption for? I said that correctly. I'm not even joking. She literally said, are you doing any traveling in the next 4 weeks in which you will need a visa? This was a week and a half after I had been told exemptions do not exist. I almost screamed. I was so mad. I was so mad. But I was like, fine, it's okay. The only thing is, I don't study in the city and we would like to move. That's another point, actually, I forgot to say. Basically, we stayed in Stuttgart. Our intention in Stuttgart was to be there for about 2 or 3 months until we could find an apartment in Tübingen. We'd arrived in the middle of a semester and it's really hard to find apartments in the middle of the semester. So we're like, look, we'll just stay in Stuttgart. I'll commute. It'll be fine. And then after a few months, we'll move. And so when we started this, I was like, hey, look, I'm studying in Tübingen. Can I move? And the first person that I spoke to said, no, once you've started an application, you have to stay where the application is. Otherwise, you'll have to start from scratch again. And if you're outside of the 90 days, you're going to be considered an overstayer. So I was going off the knowledge that we had to stay in Stuttgart this whole time. And so then I asked her at the visa appointment saying, hey, look, we finally want to move to Tübingen. And she's like, oh, why didn't you move a while ago? We would have just transferred your application. Yeah, that's a great question because I would have had my visa months before. But it's fine. We're in this situation now. We can't change the past. It's all good. I'm fine. Anyway, I said to her, this was the end of May, and I was like, look, we just want to move and we've got a trip coming up in August, but that should be fine. That should be fine. It's more than a month away. She's like, yep, no worries. If you move to Tübingen, we'll just change your application and the document will be sent to you in the post. And I was like, well, can't I come pick it up? And she's like, no, we don't allow that. You have to be sent it in the post because of COVID and because of all the regulations that were still going on. You can't actually come in here. It has to be sent securely through post. So it's like, cool, no worries. It's fine. We'll be fine. We thankfully got offered this apartment here in Tübingen, which I can put our house tour up the top. And we were like, perfect, we're moving. Like end of July was the date we were set to move. And I was like, it'll be fine. We'll have our visa by that point. It's giving enough leeway between the end of May and our moving date that we can get everything sorted. 4 weeks went by, 5 weeks went by, 6 weeks went by, 7 weeks went by, and I started panicking. Absolutely panicking because, as you might know, we went to Switzerland in August for my birthday, and theoretically, without our visa, we weren't supposed to leave the country still. And I ended up calling them and I was like, hey, what's going on? I was told that it would be 4 weeks and we'd have our visas in hand. And she's like, oh, no, honey. I don't know who told you that. But it takes at least 8 weeks for us to receive it, and then we need to process it, and then we message you saying it's on its way to you. Why is there so much contradictory information? There should not be this much contradictory information. Anyway, I had a panic attack. We got through it. We realized that it's just going to be what it is. We had documentation saying we'd been approved for a visa. We just needed to receive it. And we decided, you know what, we can't change the Switzerland trip. It's fully booked by this point. We're just going to take the documentation. Thankfully, we weren't even visa checked along the way. I've heard the occasional time that somebody has been checked crossing the border and they have somebody on the train. I think I've heard that once out of the hundreds of people that I've heard take trips. So it wasn't a big concern of us, especially because we had the documentation. So I think about end of July, I received an email saying that they'd received our Ausweis, or like our visa, from Berlin, because again, it was being printed in Berlin. Apparently it can't be printed anywhere else in Germany except Berlin, and they'd received it and it just needed to be processed. To which I responded saying, cool, thanks, I've moved to Tübingen, I've registered here, I hope you know this. And they're like, yep, cool, no worries. We moved to Tübingen and we didn't receive the Ausweis, and we're like, what's going on? Why is it not here? It should be here by now. And we ended up messaging our friend in Stuttgart who lived a suburb over from where we were living. And I know I've talked about this in the past, and I don't know if I should say this, but basically there's a door code and you go through it. You don't need a key for the front door. It's just a normal PIN code. And you go through the front door and there's just a mail stack. There's no individual boxes, there's no lockable area, it's literally just a box of mail. It was the most insecure thing ever, and I think that's why we lost so much mail and had so many packages stolen, because there was just no security whatsoever. Anyway, we ended up messaging our friend and being like, hey, if we give you the door code, can you just check and see if our visa is there? He's like, sure. And he turned up there, walked through, looked through the mail, saw the atrocious mail situation, and our visas had been sent to our old address. I don't know how long they were sitting there. I don't know why they were sent there, but I was just thankful that finally it was in somebody's hands and that we could get them. So the following day, we ended up taking a train up to Stuttgart so that we could get the visas, and oh my goodness, I have never been so happy in my life and so relieved that I wasn't going to be deported. So that's pretty much the whole story, the whole shebang, the whole terrible, traumatic, horrific thing that we went through with getting a visa. And that did not happen when we moved to Tübingen and reapplied this time around. Honestly, I sometimes can't believe what we went through, especially considering how easy it was in Tübingen. But I just wanted to talk about this because I feel like when I moved to Germany and was going through this situation, I think maybe when I was about month 2 of waiting to hear back, I scoured YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, everything to try and find some sort of person who was talking about their situation and what it was like moving to Germany and how to apply for the visa, especially in Stuttgart, because it wasn't possible to book an appointment online to see what somebody else had done. And at that moment, when I could not find anything, I could not find anything, and I scoured YouTube, I scoured Instagram, absolutely nothing. And I don't know if I was searching the wrong things, I don't know, but I spent hours and hours trying to find things. I decided that I needed to make this video. Somebody needs to know what it's like. I don't know if Stuttgart has changed and now you can book it online, or if they've gone back to their old system where you just have to turn up and get a ticket. I don't know, but I wanted to make this video so that hopefully somebody can see what it was like and how terrible it was, but also learn from the things that we did so that hopefully if you are in that situation, you can use some of that. So now for part 2, which that was a very long-winded story. I'm very sorry, but I just wanted to tell everything. Part 2 is what should have happened. So this is based off our experience in Tübingen because, again, it's a little bit different. But I also have heard that what Tübingen does is what Berlin does. So if you are moving to Berlin, you should have an online booking system. Again, it's very hard to get an appointment online, but you just have to figure out the system. I heard that the system was refreshed every morning with new appointments, and that sometimes the best time to check is mid-afternoon because they seem to refresh it then if people have cancelled appointments, which didn't happen the whole time I was looking. But I have a friend who applied for a visa and he got his appointment by searching in the middle of the afternoon. I decided to go for the morning approach because I generally like to wake up early, and I was told that it refreshes at 8 a.m. That was false. It refreshes at 7 a.m. And I also looked at weekends. Unfortunately, the one weekend that I looked at, because it just refreshes each day and it's not for a month in advance or 2 months in advance, it's something weird like a month and a half, so the days don't match up. But I looked on one Saturday and the appointments that were available ended up being for the week that we were in America, and so I couldn't take them. And then I kept waiting and waiting, and I kept refreshing at 8 a.m. and there were just no appointments available. So I decided one day, I think I woke up at like 6:30 a.m. and I checked it and it hadn't released the new day yet. So I was like, okay, it must be coming up soon. It got to about 7 o'clock and appointments were available for the whole day. So I had a choice of time. I ended up picking 9 a.m. because I thought the earlier the better, the less people that are going to be waiting, because there's always a delay. Always a delay. If you're going to do anything visa related or registration related, there's going to be a delay. So I decided to go for 9 a.m., which ended up being a good thing because I ended up forgetting a document and I then had time to go back and get it. But we booked the appointment online. It came to the day. We had a few issues with getting that document that I forgot, but it was totally fine in the end. We ended up getting to the appointment and there was a waiting room. In the waiting room, it's a basic clear waiting room. If you've got kids, they have kids' toys, which is not a bad thing. But there's basically a screen on the wall and it has your number. So when you book an appointment, it gives you a number. And we, I think, had to wait for a half an hour extra, as in our appointment was at 9 and I think our number only got called at 9:30, which is fine. It's not the end of the world. At least we had an appointment, I kept saying in my head. And we went into the appointment. The lady was super lovely. We handed over all our documents. She scanned them. She asked us a few questions about what we were doing in Germany. And then she's like, cool, yeah, that's all sorted. We'll get you to sign this here and you can pay and we'll take your fingerprints. And then I gave her my old Ausweis just to have a look at. The Ausweis, it's like a card. It's essentially your visa in card form because it also dupes as your personal ID, which you need here in Germany if you want to do anything. And I gave it to her and she's like, oh, did you previously study here in Germany? And I'm like, yeah, I'm a PhD student. I'm applying for the visa for researchers. And she's like, no, I mean your undergrad. I was like, no, I studied in New Zealand. And she's like, who did you apply through last? And I was like, Stuttgart. She's like, did you have issues? I'm like, you have no idea how many issues we had. She's like, they've put you under the wrong visa. They've put you under an undergraduate student visa, which is why you have to reapply from scratch after a year, because you have to do that with a student visa apparently. Theoretically, with the PhD visa, they give it to you for 3 or 4 years because they know you're here for a long time and you're generally a bit older and there are different requirements. But with a student visa, apparently you have to reapply every year. I was like, oh, that's wonderful. I love Stuttgart. I gave a little bit of a breakdown of what happened to us. And she's like, look, I am so sorry. That's really ridiculous. You shouldn't have gone through that. I'm glad that it's worked out now. I've now put you under the right visa and I hope this all works out for you. You'll hear from us in 4 weeks. We're still within the 4-week period, so I haven't found out yet whether that's true or not. I will certainly update you, but it was so smooth. I think our whole interview was maybe half an hour. None of the questions were trick questions. She got everything that she needed from us and it was super easy. So honestly, it was like a completely different experience. So now I'm going to go through in this final section the documents that we ended up needing. I'm sorry that this is ridiculously long, but I just wanted to give out absolutely everything that you might need if you're going to go through this situation, because this is the kind of video that I wanted when I was going through this. Okay, so I'm just going to read this out from my phone because obviously I can't remember everything, but the main thing that I needed for my PhD visa, which is called a visa for researchers or like a Forschungsvisum, I think. I can put it up here. But basically what I needed, I'll move to the side. We'll move this. What I needed was, firstly, proof of health insurance. This can be either your health insurance card, which you get if you're with public health insurance, or if you're with private health insurance, you'll get a contract. You also get the contract with the public health insurance, but at least for the private health insurance, you definitely have a contract, and you can take that in because it's got your like contract number and therefore your proof of health insurance. There is a requirement of what kind of health insurance it needs to be. We were originally with Dr. Walter, which is a student health insurance, and it's very basic. They'll basically only cover accident and emergency, which meets the requirements for Germany, but they won't cover any surgeries unless it's to do with the accident. They don't cover dental, they don't cover gynecologists, like all of that stuff. So we've now switched to a public health insurance. We're with Barmer. They're great. If you need to change to a public health insurance, I would 100% recommend Barmer, but you will need some proof of health insurance. And then I needed to bring my certificate of enrollment. That's just to say that I'm a student, that I'm enrolled full-time, but your university should be able to supply that to you. In the case of Tübingen, if you're on Alma, it's under the My Studies section. To be honest, you should have a copy of it because you'll need it. And then you need to show proof of sufficient means. This was the biggest issue for us because we're both employed outside of Germany. So I got my work contract and I had to convert, the New Zealand dollars into euros to say what my annual income was. And then I also had a set amount of money in a bank account just in case that wasn't accepted. If you don't have a job at the university that you're studying at, either as a Hiwi or whatever else job it is, then you need to have money either in a blocked account if you're a student or just in a bank account if you're PhD. I think might be a difference, but basically a blocked account is there are specific banks that will open specific accounts where you have to put in, I think, 8,600 euros, and each month you get a certain amount out of it. It's essentially like a paycheck in that sense, but their whole thing is they don't want you to turn up to Germany and end up on the streets or end up not being able to support yourself. Because you're a foreigner, you don't qualify for a lot of the aid, or you don't really qualify for any of the student allowances. So they just need to make sure that you have enough income to be able to support yourself. In some circumstances, you can theoretically also get a letter of support from your parents to say that they're willing to support you this much. So the first time around, we ended up having a bank account. It had to be a German bank account as well. We ended up just having a set amount of money in a bank account. And then this time around, they accepted my work contract, which Stuttgart had issues with. So we just went with the money in a bank account. But for this time around, they accepted my work contract, thankfully. We then had to have a biometric passport photo, and it had to be new. So our last one didn't count anymore. Thankfully not as well, because it was terrible. But we tried to go to a photo fix, which is one of those booths, and somebody had unfortunately graffitied over the camera, so that didn't work. But if you're in Germany already, you can get passport photos done at DM, which is like the drugstore, and it is incredibly easy, like unbelievably easy. And I think it only costs €7 for 6 copies. So I'd 100% recommend doing that. We then had to have a fee of between 90 and €100, and you either had to have that in cash or an EC card or Giro card, which is essentially the German version of like a debit card. It's like a local card that's German based and only works in Germany, and you can't buy stuff online. Weird way of explaining it, but that's the only way I could figure out how to do it. The first time when we were in Stuttgart, we paid with cash because we didn't have a Giro card at that time. I can do a whole separate video on how it took me 8 months to open up a bank account, which was another stressor in my life. We ended up taking cash, and then second time around, we used my Giro card. We then had to fill out an application form for the residence permit, which was essentially what visa we're applying for and all of our information. That form changes depending on what city you're in. So, there's the Tübingen one, but that's not really going to help you if you're not moving to Tübingen. The main thing is when you book an appointment online, if you can do that, they'll give you the form that you need. If you don't have a capability of booking online, then it should be on their website. In all of the circumstances that I've looked at, it is available on the website. So I definitely look for that. And then very thankfully at the end of it, it said in individual cases, the submission of additional documents may be required. Thanks for saying that. What does that even mean? What does that even mean? Additional documents. Anyway, so I ended up bringing Oh, for the visa for researchers, you have to have a hosting agreement from your university. They'll provide that, and you essentially just need to have an abstract of what your research is about, who your supervisor is, what department you're in. They need to cite your proof of income, whether it's the job contract or whether it's the bank account money, because they are kind of, with the hosting agreement, saying that they're taking responsibility for you without actually taking responsibility for you, and you have to bring that to the interview. I also brought our Meldebestätigung, which is our registration document to say that we were registered in the city of Tübingen. We didn't end up needing that in Tübingen, but we needed that in Stuttgart for some reason. I brought both our birth certificates and our marriage certificate, which I had an apostle? I don't know how to say it, sorry. But it's essentially an international version of our marriage certificate, which I got in New Zealand. Our marriage certificate was in English, so they accepted that. But if you're from a non-English speaking country and a non-German speaking country, and I think a non-French speaking country, you have to translate it into one of those 3 languages. I also brought our work contracts just in case they needed it. They did end up needing it, and they didn't want our proof of money in a bank account this time round. But I did also bring proof of money in a bank account. I brought all of our passports as well because they needed to see that in the end. And I brought our New Zealand driver's licenses, which they didn't need. I actually have a whole wad of documents, which I bring pretty much every time we have an interview like this, just in case they need something. But those are the main things that came to my mind. And that was everything that I needed for my visa for researchers. It's a very short list, and they needed a lot less. I mentioned that they didn't need the language requirement in the end, which was a really big thing. And it's one of the reasons that I'm such a big proponent of doing a PhD in Germany, because it's essentially free to study here and you don't need to have German. I think it's good, and I think you should learn German if you're coming here, but you don't need to have it for a visa. And I think that's a really big draw card that not many people know about. Okay, so then if we go to the final part, which is the visa for family reunification, which is what Luke applied for. So likewise, he needed proof of health insurance. He needed his marriage certificate to show, our marriage certificate to show that we were married, and that's why he was here. You can't apply for this if you're not married. I don't think that partners count in this circumstance. He needed to show our rental contract for some reason. I think it was to do with the money, and they base how much money you either need in a blocked account or how much money you need in a bank account / your work contract based on how much you're paying in rent. On the Tübingen website, it said that he needed basic German language skills equivalent to A1, but when we turned up, he didn't end up needing to show that. Thankfully, he does have that because he's at some university courses in German, which I think are equivalent to A2, so we were just going to show that, but they didn't end up asking for that. And he specifically didn't need that in Stuttgart, and they stated that. He then needed proof of livelihood security, so we just showed his employment contracts, and because he's self-employed, we showed the last 3 months of his earnings. He then needed to fill out a form which was like an examination of marital cohabitation to say that we're living together and therefore we're paying one set of rent and all that. And he needed my identity papers, but because I was also applying for a visa, they already had those. He needed the biometric passport photo, the fee between 90 and 100 euros, the same application form for a residence permit, and it also says additional documents just in case they need it, but they didn't end up having any for him. So I hope that this has been helpful. That's kind of the end of the saga of this whole thing. But I just wanted to break down absolutely everything that we went through so that hopefully somebody else can use this to their advantage and learn from what we did and maybe be able to shorten the amount of time that they're waiting. It should not be this difficult. It really shouldn't take this long. But we had an awful experience the first time round, and thankfully the second time round it just wasn't as bad. I think my one tip, if you are moving to Stuttgart, because it is a really lovely city and I really love it there, their visa office is just absolutely atrocious, is depending on where you are, like I mentioned, if you're living on the outskirts of Tübingen, you apply to your specific district foreigners office. They do have that option in Stuttgart as well if you're far enough out. Unfortunately, we were living just on the border, and so we were still considered part of Stuttgart. But if you're in Esslingen or I think even Leonberg, they have their own foreigners office and you can apply there. So one thing that might not be a bad thought is, if you are considering moving to Stuttgart, is moving to the outer skirts. In saying that, Esslingen is like 15 minutes by train from the city centre, so it's really not that bad if you're comparing to places like LA, New York, Auckland, Sydney, any of those places which are really fast spreading cities. Considering that Stuttgart is very, very dense in the centre, and then it's very well connected with public transport, my biggest tip would be look at moving outside so that you're not dealing with the city centre foreigners office, which is the main problem. But anyway, I hope that has helped in some way. If you've listened to this whole thing, like, props to you. I talked a lot and my throat is now sore, but I've drunk half my wine and I'm still very sane. But I hope that this helped in some way, and if you have any questions about this whole situation, please feel free to leave a comment. I will try to answer as much as I can. I'm pretty much just going to start a whole series about my experience of moving to Germany and different questions that people might have, including how much it costs to be a student here, how much I'm paying for my university fees, all of that information. So if you do have any questions, please let me know. I'd love to help out and kind of be your like big sister here in Germany, help, I don't know, answer some of your questions and hopefully make the experience a little bit more smooth. Thanks for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this, and I will see you with another video very soon. Bye!